In 1969, a black Oldsmobile driven by US Senator Ted Kennedy careened off a bridge. Inside was passenger Mary Jo Kopechne, who, unlike the driver, never made it back to the surface of the pond. The story of the night's events remain muddled to this day. The incident took place at the Dyke Bridge on the tiny island of Chappaquiddick, near Martha's Vineyard, with the vehicle landing upside down in the tidal Puka Pond. The 37-year-old Kennedy survived the crash, but the young woman riding with him didn't. Though newspaper headlines at the time identified her simply as a blonde, she was 28-year-old Mary Jo Kopechne, a respected political operative who had worked on the presidential campaign of Senator Kennedy's brother, Robert Kennedy. The crash occurred near midnight, following a party in a rented cottage on the island, accessible only by ferry from Martha's Vineyard. In attendance at the party were 6 women, including Mary Jo. They were known as the Boiler Room Girls, because of the windowless office they had worked in during the campaign. Mary Jo Kopechne, the daughter of an insurance salesman, was born in the village of 40 Fort, Pennsylvania, on the 26th of July 1940. After graduating from Caldwell College for Women in New Jersey, she moved to Washington, where she worked as a secretary for George Smathers and Robert Kennedy. During this time, she shared an apartment with Nancy Carroll Tyler, who worked for Bobby Baker. On the 17th of July 1969, Mary Jo joined several other women who had worked for the Kennedy family at the Edgartown Regatta. She stayed at the Katama Shores Motor Inn on the southern tip of Martha's Vineyard. The following day, the women travelled across to Chappaquiddick Island. They were joined by Edward Kennedy, and later that night they held a party at Lawrence Cottage. Mary Jo and Edward Kennedy left the party at 11:15 p.m. Kennedy had offered to take Mary Jo back to the motel. He later explained what happened. I was unfamiliar with the road and turned onto Dyke Road instead of bearing left on Main Street. After proceeding for approximately a half mile on Dyke Road, I descended a hill and came upon a narrow bridge. The car went off the side of the bridge. The car turned over and sank into the water and landed with the roof resting on the bottom. I attempted to open the door and window of the car, but have no recollection of how I got out of the car. I came to the surface and then repeatedly dove down to the car in an attempt to see if the passenger was still in the car. I was unsuccessful in the attempt. Instead of ringing the local authorities to report the accident, Edward Kennedy returned to the party. According to a statement issued by Kennedy on the 25th of July 1969, instead of looking directly for a telephone number, and after lying exhausted in the grass for an undetermined time, I walked back to the cottage where the party was being held and requested the help of two friends, my cousin Joseph Gargan and Paul Markham, and directed them to return immediately to the scene with me. This was some time after midnight, in order to undertake a new effort to dive. When this third and final attempt to rescue Mary Jo ended in failure, Kennedy returned to his hotel. As the ferry had shut down for the night, Kennedy swam back to Edgartown. It was not until the following morning that he rang the police to report the incident. By this time the police had already found Mary Jo Kopechne's body in the submerged Oldsmobile. Kennedy did not inform the police of the accident while he was at the hotel. Instead, at 9 a.m. he joined Gargan and Markham on the ferry back to Chappaquiddick Island. Steve Ewing, the ferry operator, reported Kennedy in a jovial mood. It was only when Kennedy reached the island that he phoned the authorities about the accident that had taken place the previous night. Dr. Robert Watt, Kennedy's family doctor, explained his patient's strange behavior by claiming that he was in a state of shock and confusion and possible concussion. Edward Kennedy was found guilty of leaving the scene of the accident and received a suspended 2-month jail term and 1-year driving ban. That night he appeared on television to give his explanation about what had happened. My conduct and conversations during the next several hours, to the extent that I can remember them, make no sense to me at all. Although my doctors informed me that I suffered a cerebral concussion as well as shock, I do not seek to escape responsibility for my actions by placing the blame either on the physical, emotional trauma brought on by the accident or on anyone else. I regard as indefensible the fact that I did not report the accident to the police immediately. At the inquest, Judge James Boyle raised doubts about Kennedy's testimony. He pointed out that Kennedy had a good knowledge of Chappaquiddick Island, and he could not understand how he managed to drive down Dyke Road by mistake. For example, on the day of the accident, Kennedy had twice driven on Dyke Road to go to the beach for a swim. To get to this road involved a 90-degree turn off an asphalt road onto a rough, bumpy dirt track. An investigator at the scene of the accident suggested that Kennedy approached the bridge at an estimated 34 miles per hour. At around 17 feet from the bridge, Kennedy braked violently. This locked the front wheels. Investigators found it difficult to understand why he was crossing Dyke Bridge when he said he was attempting to reach Edgartown, which was in the opposite direction. They also could not understand why he was driving so fast on this unlit, uneven road. They also could not work out how Kennedy escaped from the car. When it was recovered from the water, all the doors were locked. 3 of the windows were either open or smashed in. If Kennedy, a large-framed, 6 foot 2 inches tall man, could manage to get out of the car, why was it impossible for Mary Jo, a slender 5 foot 2 inches tall, not to do the same? Local experts could not understand why Kennedy, and later Markham and Gargan, could not rescue Mary Jo from the car. It also surprised investigators that Kennedy did not seek help from Pierre Malm, who only lived 135 meters from the bridge. At the inquest, Kennedy was unable to answer this question. There were also doubts about the way Mary Jo died. When John Farrar, a diver for the local fire department, found Mary Jo's body the morning after the crash, its positioning suggested she had remained alive for an unknown period of time after the car went underwater. Her face was pressed into the footwell, and her hands gripped the back of the front seat, as if she had been trying to push her head into a pocket of air. After bringing up the dead girl's body by hand and looking into her face that morning, Farrar became obsessed with the idea that the girl had been trapped alive for hours inside the car, and that if Kennedy hadn't waited so long to call for help, he, Farrar, could have brought her to the surface alive. John Farrar at the time expressed some strong views about the case. "People don't like facts. People don't like facts like this. People don't want to think. They have to have a champion to worship. If he receives so much as a vote for president, it's a disgusting comment on America." Farrar believes Kennedy is a liar. "As far as I'm concerned, nothing the man has said has fit. It's a pack of lies, misfitting facts. Lies of time and tide, shall we say. There was a lack of interest in her life, a complete abandonment of her that caused her death. When asked by reporters how he could be so certain that the girl lived before she drowned, he was quick to offer, "She didn't drown, that's the point. She died of suffocation in her own air void. Gene Free, the undertaker, has said to me, and said to others, that he feels she did not drown, but died of suffocation in her own air void. He's done 24 embalmings on drowned victims, and in every case they've been filled with water. Every body cavity filled with gallons of water. Full of water from their asshole to their appetites, as Gene Free puts it." But Jean found about half a teacup in her. Half a teacup, that's all. She suffocated to death, but it took her at least 3 or 4 hours to die. I could have had her out of that car 25 minutes after I got the call, but he didn't call. How do I know she was alive that long? Because of the fact that the trunk was filled with air and still dry. Because of the fact that the trunk was the main source of air release, and because John Album, whose winch lifted the car up, saw air bubbles coming from inside the car. Oh, hello, Judith. "Sometimes I'd like to scream a lot, but I'm trying to hold it back," said Jo Kopechne, the mother of Mary Jo, to the Boston Globe. It would be nice if somebody spoke up. What she didn't understand was how Gargan and Markham, Kennedy's aides, who also attempted to retrieve Mary Jo from the car after the accident, didn't report the accident or force Kennedy to do so. Gargan and Markham not only failed to get immediate help, but also let the senator swim back alone to report the accident from Edgartown, Jo Kopechne explains. "This is the big hurt, the nightmare we have to live with for the rest of our lives. That Mary Jo was left in the water for 9 hours. She didn't belong there." Interestingly, no public inquest into the death occurred, and her parents filed a petition preventing an autopsy. It was reported in the New York Times Magazine that Joseph Kopechne said that he and his wife rejected an autopsy because "we were led to believe that the autopsy was primarily to find out if my daughter was pregnant." Whether you're on the left or the right side of the aisle, it's imperative that we take a pretty hard, unvarnished look at our heroes these days. Chappaquiddick film director John Curran says, "The time is done to let all these guys skate by. I think if this story happened now, it would overshadow the moon landing." Kennedy would serve Massachusetts in the Senate for 3 more decades and would become one of the nation's most respected elder statesmen by the time of his death of brain cancer in 2009. In True Compass, a memoir published after his death, Kennedy wrote that his actions the night of the accident were inexcusable and that he made terrible decisions. He knew at the time the accident would be devastating to his family, Kennedy admitted, as well as damaging to his political career. Finally, Kennedy wrote that, "My burden is nothing compared to Kopechne's loss, and the suffering her family had to endure. She also didn't deserve to be linked to me in a romantic way. She deserved better than that." Rumors had abounded that the two had been drinking that night and that they had been intimate with one another. Mary Jo's funeral was held on July the 22nd, 1969 at St. Vincent's Roman Catholic Church in Plymouth, Pennsylvania, and she was buried in the parish cemetery there. A small column appeared in the New York Times, July the 19th, 1973. Flowers from Senator and Mrs. Edward M. Kennedy were placed today on the grave of Mary Jo Kopechne in a small cemetery near here, the 4th anniversary of Miss Kopechne's death. Well, my friends, thank you for joining me at Oddie's Cinema. Refreshments will be served in the foyer. So, I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Another sad case. Poor Mary Jo. Before I share my thoughts on what I think happened, I would just like to point out that nobody knows how they will react in a situation like that where it's an emergency and you're in fear of your life. You don't know how you're going to act. Some people think they know how they're going to act, but it's usually the opposite. It's usually the big macho types who panic when it comes to these sort of situations, and it's usually the humble ones who don't say much who usually are the brave souls. So you never know how you're going to act, and I can't blame Edward Kennedy for instinctively wanting to save his own life. Sometimes instinct takes over. You're going to, the body's immediate reaction is to get out of the way of danger, and I guess that's what he did. As I say, I can't blame him for that. I'm not going to judge him on that, but what I am going to judge him on is the fact that he didn't contact the authorities immediately. If there was a chance of saving that girl's life, he should have done it, but he didn't, because he panicked and realized he was going to be in big trouble, so he was wanting to save his own hide. These are my personal thoughts, just my personal thoughts. Edward Kennedy was a powerful man. Mary Jo looked up to him. She was probably infatuated with him, He was possibly, in her eyes, going to be the next president. He was a good-looking man. Why wouldn't she be? I think she got a bit tipsy at the party. I think he did too. They drove away in the car to some quiet corner where they could make out, as my US friends term it. And that's why the doors were locked. They locked the doors so they could have, just in case someone creeped up on them. I don't know why afterwards he chose to drive so fast in the pitch black. Possibly he was drunk. hence the reason he waited so long before contacting the authorities. I believe he crashed the car. That's why there was so much damage on it. If you look back at the photos I provided, I think he crashed the car. It's probably rolled a few times before it went over the bridge. And I believe that she was knocked unconscious. And that's why she didn't get out, even though the window was broken open. She was unconscious. She got out the car in panic, swam to the surface. Maybe he did try and go back down again, realized she was unconscious. Now, her friend stated that she left her purse and keys at the party. Was it just forgetfulness, or is it possible she was more than tipsy? Was she perhaps drunk? Did they start making out, and did she pass out? And Edward Kennedy got very annoyed and then drove home at high speed. Of course, that's just all conjecture. I don't know. I'm just sort of running thoughts through my mind. Let me know what you think. There is another theory I've heard, which also is very plausible, and that theory is that he wasn't actually driving the car when the accident happened, that she was driving, that Mary Jo was driving. There is a report that a sheriff deputy was going home after being on duty that night, and he saw that car, and he goes, he couldn't be mistaken because there was no other Oldsmobile on the island. That was Kennedy's rented Oldsmobile that he saw, and it took off at high speed when they noticed they were being observed. And an investigator, his theory is that Senator Kennedy obviously did not want to be stopped by the police. It would be very embarrassing for him because he was married and also as a political figure. And so that he asked Mary Jo to let him out the car and told her to drive back. And she was not experienced with such a large car, having only driven a small Volkswagen, a little Beetle car, and that possibly being under the influence of drink, she couldn't judge and didn't know the area at all, and she actually crashed. The other thing was the car landed on its right side in the water, causing some damage apparently to the side of the car and smashed the window. It said if she had been a passenger, she would have had cuts all over her arm and injuries. There was absolutely no injuries at all, suggesting that she was the driver. What do you think of that theory? And by the way, the sheriff deputy's report was never asked for during the inquiry. They didn't want him to come forward and give evidence. And that's also a bit suspicious. So many things going on there. Also, Senator Kennedy the next morning was talking to an elderly couple, and they said he was totally relaxed. And then his two aides come along, pulled him aside, took him in the room, and when he came out, he looked very distressed, which would also suggest that he didn't know about the accident until the next morning, probably thinking that Mary Jo had arrived safely back at her hotel, and was sleeping safely. The suggested reason that Kennedy's legal advisors concocted this story of it being a tragic accident was that it could make Kennedy out to be a bit of a hero, that he went down after the crash and tried to get her body out of the car, or tried to rescue her from the car, instead of the sordid story that he was making out with Mary Jo in the car, and he got out of the car so that he wouldn't get caught, and sent her onwards with the car to meet her fate. Very interesting indeed, my dear Oddites. But one thing I will say, he obviously has not revealed the whole truth, even to his dying day. He may have said he regrets some things, regrets his actions, but he's never revealed the real truth. He has lied, in my opinion, about what really happened that night. We'll never know. So I'm just giving my opinion, what I believe happened, and I think it's an absolutely horrifying thought to think that she was trapped in there alive. By the way, I just want to point out that I'm not biased towards Kennedy or the Kennedys at all. I'm not really politically minded in any way. I'm just judging him for his actions. Nothing to do with his political leanings or anything like that. I'm just really looking at this whole case and giving my opinion on it, regardless of the important and powerful family he came from. So, my dear friends, Halloween is coming up. My goodness, I have to think of something dark and gruesome. for All Hallows Eve. So I think for October there's going to be 2 videos with a suitable theme for the occasion. Not sure yet. Well, I do have something in mind for one of them. Not sure about the other one, but rest assured, it will be creepy and dark. My dear friends, I'm going to head off now. Yeah, I think I've rambled on enough. Let me know your thoughts on this case. It's something that has really stuck in my mind, as most of the cases I do cover. It's something that has that I have read about much earlier and has stuck in my mind. I try to imagine poor Mary Jo in that car if she was still alive, and the evidence seems to point in that direction. Absolutely must have been terrifying for her. Anyway, I hope she's at peace now. I hope she's shining on somewhere. Take care, my dear friends, and until next time, bye-bye.